Assalamualaikum dear students, and welcome to the 56th session of the KIPS Distance Learning Program Newspaper Roundup session. I'm your host Shahrukh Heather, and today we're going to see what kind of changes have we observed between the relationship of Israel and the Arab world, and what kind of implication will that have on the Middle Eastern politics, and what kind of future can we observe. And in the next vlog we're going to see whether Pakistan should reconsider recognizing Israel and establishing diplomatic and economic relations, because that has its obvious benefits but at the same time drawbacks as well. So first of all, we have seen that the United States has become very overt and very clear in its support for the Jewish Zionist state of Israel, and the Trump administration in particular gave its oversight and outright support to Israel and its plan to annex the entire Palestinian land by shifting US embassy to Israel from Tel Aviv, the capital of Israel, to Jerusalem, which was in reality a contravention of international law, of United Nations Security Council resolutions, and of all international diplomatic conventions. But despite that, US took the risk of shifting that embassy to give the world a message that the US is behind Israel. Secondly, the Trump administration, through their special advisor Jared Kushner, who is the son-in-law of Donald Trump obviously, unveiled his deal of the century, which was virtually basically burying the two-state solution of the Palestinian-Israel conflict. And it became quite clear that the United States completely supports the annexation and the eating up of Palestinian land and territories by the Israeli state. And this is especially when the government of Prime Minister Netanyahu has been pursuing a very rigorous and ruthless policy of expanding Jewish settlements into more and more Palestinian lands permanently, and eating up their land and completely abusing their right to self-determination, their right to their lands, the right of the return of refugees, which are completely recognized under the United Nations Universal Declaration of Human Rights. So in effect, you can say that Israel is committing crimes against humanity, and the United States has given its support for that. So this is where the United States stands, the hypocritical, hegemon of the world. And now, secondly, we have seen increasing Israel and Arab alignment. Now, this is very rare, especially in the last 70 to 80 years, and an unprecedented move. But the causes for that move are quite clear. Obviously, there is no doubt why this is happening. So the Abraham Accords, which basically recognize the secret liaison that has been happening for decades now between Israel and UAE and Bahrain, and perhaps in the future the Kingdom of Saudi Arabia as well. The Abraham Accords recognized those secret liaisons and made them official, so that the United Arab Emirates and Bahrain, and obviously now Sudan, could establish diplomatic and economic relations of mutual benefit with Israel and increase their overall security paradigm when it comes to their arch rival in the region, which is obviously the Islamic Republic of Iran. Secondly, there have been reports of secret meeting between Prime Minister Netanyahu and Crown Prince Mohammed bin Salman in a small city, which the Kingdom of Saudi Arabia wants to develop into an industrial capital in Saudi Arabia. Although the Ministry of Foreign Affairs of KSA has denied that meeting, but the United States and Israel haven't, and it is quite clear that that meeting actually did take place. Obviously, the reason why KSA denied it is because there could be fear of some outright backlash, not just from other Muslim nations who refuse to recognize Israel and still believe in the two-state solution, but also from generally the Muslim population around the world, and especially in the Kingdom of Saudi Arabia, because they are still quite conservative. Thirdly, the Secretary of State of the United States, Pompeo, in a news briefing recently predicted that many more Muslim countries are going to recognize Israel and establish diplomatic and economic relations in the coming month. And this is going to become a new emergent powerful bloc in the Middle East, supported and in search for the mutual recognition and achievement of US and Israeli interests and Kingdom of Saudi Arabian interests in the region. And it has become quite clear through these important developments that the Arab states, the Arab world, has largely given up on their Palestinian cause, because they think that Palestine simply cannot be liberated from Israel, obviously because it is a nuclear state and has massive defense capabilities, one of the strongest armies in the Middle East, and the Arab states, even if they join together, they can't take down the Israeli mammoth, as they did try in the Six-Day War of 1967, which would be a disaster for the participating Arab states. Moreover, and finally, there have been reports that the Kingdom of Saudi Arabia has been pressurizing Pakistan to basically recognize Israel as well, and the pressure had reached such levels that the Prime Minister of Pakistan, Imran Khan, was forced to declare in public in a news briefing that no, Pakistan will never review its policy towards Israel unless Israel adheres to the two-state solution and the Palestinians get their own country. Now, considering all of these important developments, what kind of implication can we expect on the Middle Eastern region from this rapprochements and increasing alignments, and what does the future hold for the Muslim world in general and the Middle Eastern world in particular? So, I believe that there has been an emerging bloc of United States, the Kingdom of Saudi Arabia, generally other Arab states and Israel, and this power bloc in the Middle East is created or is in the books as a counter balance to the Iran, Russia and possibly Turkey bloc in the Middle East, who have some converging interests and who have been gaining significant ground in the Middle Eastern theater in the last 5 to 6 years, especially when talking about the Syrian civil war, which largely the United States and its allies lost. Secondly, ever since the United States lost Iraq to Iran after its invasion of Iraq in 2003, and increasing Iranian influence and footprint in Iraq has been a source of constant trouble for American interests in the Middle East, and they have been concerned about the increasing alignment and increasing clout of Iran in the broader Middle Eastern region, which is one of the reasons why the Trump administration withdrew from the Iran nuclear deal in the first place and reimposed sanctions, because through the removal of sanctions and being welcomed into the international community and international trade regimes, Iran was actually able to really supplant its efforts of increasing its regional clout, funding its military proxies all around the region, and really cementing its security paradigm in the broader Middle Eastern region. So, in that context, the United States and obviously the Kingdom of Saudi Arabia also lost the Syrian civil war to Iran-Russia alliance as well, which is one of the reasons why the Assad regime still survives, and it has largely created a major security challenge for both Kingdom of Saudi Arabia and Israel, because this war has brought Iranian proxies, Iranian militia, and Iranian influence on the borders of Israel and Kingdom of Saudi Arabia, which is naturally a source of national security crisis for the both countries. Moreover, the increasing Russian footprint in the Middle Eastern region, such as in the Syrian civil war theater, perhaps in Iraq as well, is also a source of tension for US interests, because naturally Russian increasing influence and success in achieving its interest would definitely come at the stake of US interests in the region. And finally, these two large blocs are perhaps emerging in the Middle East, and they have completely opposed the interest, and the possibility of any sort of next great war in the Middle East cannot be completely rooted out. But at the same time, we can hope that sanity will prevail and these states will agree to cooperate rather than to fight more and more wars. In that respect, I think the Kingdom of Saudi Arabia and Iran need to open up diplomatic channels and through third parties engage with each other in a mediatory environment and reconciliatory environment to understand that the future of both these nations is closely and intimately tied, and the intervention by extraterritorial powers such as Russia and the United States will only serve the interests of those powers rather than the interests of the Middle Eastern countries themselves. So there is a greater need for greater collaboration, diplomatic alignment between the Middle Eastern countries rather than the constant meddling of foreign powers, because that has been the number one cause and source of instability, wars, hunger, poverty, civil wars in the Middle Eastern region. So that's something for you to think about. Thank you very much for your patience. Allah Hafiz.